Beneath the sleek glass of the devices that dictate our daily lives, and deep within the radar-absorbing skin of advanced military aircraft, lies a profound, deliberately engineered vulnerability. We are living in an era where the illusion of technological independence masks a chilling reality of absolute reliance. The fundamental building blocks of modern civilization, a specific group of 17 chemically similar elements, have been quietly weaponized by a single sovereign power. This is the unseen architecture of global dominance, where control over the dirt beneath our feet dictates the trajectory of the 21st century. This is not merely a market advantage, it is a calculated geopolitical stranglehold. We must define this term precisely. A stranglehold, in this context, is the deliberate monopolization of a critical resource to compel compliance and deter opposition on the world stage. The global tech future, from the rapid transition toward renewable energy to the vanguard of artificial intelligence hardware, is entirely captive to this dynamic. Through a masterclass in strategic foresight, China has secured a near-absolute monopoly over the extraction, processing, and refinement of rare earth minerals, transforming geological deposits into the ultimate instruments of global leverage. The seeds of this asymmetric warfare were planted decades ago, hidden in plain sight from a Western world intoxicated by the promises of unfettered globalization. In 1992, Paramount leader Deng Xiaoping delivered a stark, prophetic declaration, stating that while the Middle East possessed oil, his nation possessed rare earths. This was not a mere observation of geological fortune. It was the unveiling of a long-term strategic doctrine. While Western nations outsourced their heavy industries and shuttered their domestic mines in pursuit of short-term corporate profits and cleaner local environments, Beijing initiated a methodical, state-sponsored campaign to corner the market. Through a devastatingly effective strategy of state-subsidized overproduction, the global market was systematically flooded with artificially cheap, rare earth minerals throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries. This was an act of predatory pricing on a planetary scale. Competing mines in the United States, Australia, and elsewhere, unable to operate at such immense financial losses, were driven into bankruptcy or forced to cease operations entirely. The competition was not simply defeated, it was eradicated, leaving a vacuum that only one nation was prepared to fill. The true cost of this dominance, however, is written into the scarred, toxic landscape of Inner Mongolia and other mining regions within the country. The extraction and separation of these elements is an exceptionally hazardous process, generating massive quantities of radioactive wastewater and toxic sludge. By operating with lax environmental regulations and prioritizing geopolitical objectives over ecological preservation, the state absorbed the devastating environmental toll that Western democracies refused to stomach. This environmental sacrifice was the hidden subsidy that fueled the destruction of global competition, a calculated trade-off for undisputed hegemony or supreme geopolitical dominance over rival states. Yet, while the world eventually recognized the danger of relying on a single source for raw extraction, they fundamentally misunderstood the true nature of the trap. The masterstroke was not merely mining the ore, it was the absolute monopolization of the labyrinthine processing and refining infrastructure, transforming raw, mixed rare earth oxides into the highly purified metals required for advanced manufacturing is a complex, highly specialized, and environmentally toxic endeavor. Today, even if a Western nation successfully pulls these minerals from its own soil, it almost inevitably must ship that raw material across the Pacific to be refined into usable components. Consider the pinnacle of Western military aviation, the F-35 Lightning II stealth fighter. Each of these highly classified aircraft requires over 900 pounds of rare earth materials to function, powering everything from its advanced radar systems to its precision-guided munitions. This presents a paralyzing paradox for the Pentagon and allied defense ministries. Defense systems designed specifically to deter and counter a strategic rival are fundamentally reliant on the continuous goodwill of that very rival for their construction and maintenance. The supply chain for the most lethal weapons on Earth begins deep within the borders of the nation they are meant to defend against. The theoretical threat of this resource weaponization became a chilling, undeniable reality in 2010. Following a maritime collision near the disputed Senkaku Islands, Beijing abruptly halted all exports of rare earth minerals to Japan. The impact was instantaneous and devastating, paralyzing Japanese electronics manufacturing and sending shockwaves through the global economy. This embargo was a proof of concept, a stark demonstration that the supply chain could and would be used as a blunt instrument of diplomatic coercion. It was a warning shot that proved traditional military force was no longer required to cripple an adversary's economy. Beyond the theater of geopolitical conflict, the entire global tech future is tethered to this single, fragile supply line. The transition away from fossil fuels, heralded as the salvation of the planet, is entirely dependent on these elements. Electric vehicles require immense quantities of neodymium and praseodymium to manufacture the permanent magnets that power their lightweight, highly efficient motors. Massive offshore wind turbines rely on tons of these same materials to generate electricity without constant mechanical failure. The Green Revolution is not a liberation from resource dependency. It is a direct transfer of reliance from Middle Eastern oil cartels to a centralized, state-controlled mineral monopoly. The sudden, terrifying awakening of Western capitals to this strategic deficit sparked a frantic yet largely impotent scramble for alternative sources. Governments pledged billions in subsidies to resurrect dormant domestic supply chains, attempting to reverse decades of industrial decay overnight. However, rebuilding an entire sector from scratch, developing the necessary intellectual property, and training a new generation of specialized metallurgists is a generational undertaking. Capital alone cannot instantly recreate the highly integrated, deeply subsidized ecosystem that Beijing spent 30 years meticulously constructing. Even when alternative sources of ore are located and funded, the inescapable gravity of the shadow network reasserts itself. This shadow network refers to the vast, opaque web of Chinese state-owned enterprises that control the intermediate stages of production globally. For years, the Mountain Pass mine in California, once the world's premier source of rare earths, was forced to export its freshly mined ore directly to China for processing because the United States lacked the domestic facilities to refine its own resources. The illusion of domestic production merely masked a deeper, more insidious layer of dependency. The strategy has now evolved far beyond mere resource extraction and refinement. Having secured the foundation of the supply chain, the focus has violently shifted upward toward the monopolization of high-value manufacturing. Initiatives like Made in China 2025 dictate that the state will no longer simply export the raw magnets and refined metals. It will dominate the production of the electric vehicles, the advanced robotics, and the defense systems themselves. By controlling the raw materials, they artificially inflate the costs for foreign competitors while subsidizing their own domestic tech champions, systematically hollowing out Western industrial bases from the inside out. We are witnessing the flawless execution of hybrid warfare, a theater of conflict where economic coercion, supply chain manipulation, and technological dependency replace traditional military conquest. In this paradigm, a nation does not need to bomb an adversary's factories if it can simply withhold the materials required to turn the lights on. The strategic control of rare earth minerals by China ensures that any future global conflict, whether economic or military, will be fought on terms dictated entirely by Beijing. They hold the kill switch to the modern world. This shadow network of influence extends far beyond the borders of the mainland, aggressively securing future supply lines across the globe. Through the sprawling infrastructure investments of the Belt and Road Initiative, state-backed entities are quietly locking up mining rights in resource-rich, developing nations across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. This is a preemptive strike against any Western attempt to diversify the global supply chain. By the time allied nations identify a new potential source of these critical minerals, they inevitably find that a Chinese state-owned enterprise already holds the long-term extraction contracts. Recent escalations have proven that the era of quiet accumulation is over, replaced by an era of active, punitive leverage. Recent export restrictions imposed on related critical elements, such as gallium, germanium, and graphite, materials essential for semiconductor manufacturing and battery production, serve as calculated demonstrations of power. These sudden bureaucratic chokeholds are designed to induce panic in Western boardrooms, a stark reminder that the flow of modern technology operates entirely at the discretion of a rival power. The message is unequivocal, compliance is mandatory, and resistance carries an existential economic cost. The concept of decoupling, frequently championed in Western political discourse as the ultimate solution, remains a dangerous, perhaps fatal, illusion. To truly sever the technological supply chains from this mineral grip would require a restructuring of the global economy so violent and expensive that it would likely trigger a massive global depression. Consumers accustomed to cheap electronics and affordable electric vehicles would face astronomical price increases. The strategic deficit is so profound and the integration so deep that extracting the West from this dependency may prove mathematically and industrially impossible in the near term. To understand the true depth of this crisis is to recognize that the very architecture of the 21st century has been built on a foundation controlled by a competitor with a vastly different vision for the global order. Every advancement in artificial intelligence, every deployment of a new satellite constellation, and every rollout of next-generation defense architecture simultaneously increases the leverage held by a single centralized authority. The global tech future is not a frontier of boundless human potential. It is a meticulously constructed geopolitical cage. The strategic control of rare earth minerals by China is not a looming threat on the horizon. It is an established, inescapable reality that defines the current balance of global power. The battle for the foundational elements of the future was fought in the shadows over the last 3 decades, and the West did not even realize it was a participant until the war was already lost. As the world races blindly toward an increasingly digitized, electrified, and technologically dependent future, it marches directly into the jaws of a trap that was set before most of the current technology was even invented. The dirt has been conquered, and with it, the future.